For the first time in 10 years, Côte d'Ivoire organized presidential elections on the 31st of October 2010. The second round saw a tight race between opposition leader Alassane Ouattara and the incumbent president Laurent Gbagbo. Ouattara was first declared winner by the Independent Electoral Commission, but the Constitutional Council soon proclaimed Gbagbo as president. The international community considered Ouattara the winner. The UN recognized his victory. Both candidates were then sworn in on the same day, but soon violence broke out as more than 3,000 people were reportedly killed in clashes opposing Ouattara and Gbagbo supporters. On the 11th of April 2011, Laurent Gbagbo and his wife were captured, and he was charged by the International Criminal Court with 4 counts of crimes against humanity, murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, inhumane acts as well as persecution. Now, with this case in point, the ICC is in question on the African continent due to its apparent flawed structures and procedure. With the AU backing a mass exodus by African states, we discuss the ICC's relevancy and its ability to hold leaders of a state accountable. Victor Homo Eswana, author and facilitator, joins us in studio to unpack. Good morning, Victor. Thank you for joining us bright and early.
Morning, Lisa. Yeah.
I mean, the role of the ICC on the African continent, as we can see that perceptions about its relevancy and its effectiveness is in question. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's ask the question why the ICC was formed in the first place.
Okay.
It was formed as a result of, I think, a process that goes back to 1919. World War I just ended, and the international community acknowledged that certain violations of human rights, certain genocide acts, certain crimes against humanity, and as they call them, crimes of aggression, fall beyond the jurisdiction of national judicial systems. And in response to that, there was always an agreement all these years that there's a need for an international arbitration forum. Okay. So the question is, are there genocidal acts on the African continent? Are there crimes against humanity? Are there crimes of aggression? Are politicians, the people in power, using their powers to violate those who are vulnerable in society, who should be protected? The answer to all these questions is yes, 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 yes. Are the legal or judicial systems of the individual countries able to act against these aggressors? The answer is mostly no. Then what? So what do you say to a woman who is a victim of rape as a war crime, who cannot go to her own national court to get justice? Do you say, tough luck, you are too weak? No. So the International Criminal Court is relevant to Africa. The question is, why are leaders of Africa finding themselves falling foul of the International Criminal Court? Am I saying the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is perfect? No, it's not. In fact, even on the case of Côte d'Ivoire, there are people who criticize certain of its approaches, decisions. But the question is, the ICC, there's no way anybody can argue that it's not relevant. Lastly, is it picking on Africans? No. Remember, the ICC doesn't go anywhere and pick a case to prosecute. Somebody reports the case, and then it responds. So if it so happens that Africans are finding themselves having to go a lot to the ICC, let's ask ourselves why Africans find that they cannot trust their own judicial systems and have to go to another court.
But I mean, many are saying that 9 out of the 10 cases so far at the ICC is focused on Africa, hence the unfair, targeting on Africa. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at Burundi right now as we speak, where President Nkurunziza has gone and decided, I'm going to go for third term anyway, in spite of what you say. You look at what's happening in Togo, where the son of the president who ruled there for close to 40 years, who was made to succeed his father when he died, and eventually, yes, won an election, and has already done 3 terms, now wants to go for a fourth term. And what has been happening when people go out into the streets to protest, they get shot at. You can mention so many other countries, even in countries that are not in a state of civil war, but you still find excesses by police forces, by the army, and so on. if these things are prevalent on the African continent, I'm an African, I can only speak for what's happening on this continent. And I'm saying I'm not really ready to take a case and say, why is the ICC? Because I travel this continent. Yeah. I see these violations. And I know that often the judicial systems of these countries are not able to handle them. Sometimes they are way too compromised to act. And therefore, in defense of that child who might find himself caught in a war situation, that teenager who might be forced to be a child soldier, that woman who might be raped as an act of aggression to force a political concession out of the people they support, I say we need an arbitration forum. Okay. We can talk about how to perfect how it does its business, how to resource it more, to make it a lot more balanced in how it prosecutes. For example, even in Cote d'Ivoire, if you listen, there are people who are saying, yeah, but the civil war was not perpetrated by one side. Yeah. Yes, it's true. In a civil war, there are two sides. But if you are a president, you are a head of state, and you are seen to be using your power to perpetrate war crimes or acts of aggression, maybe your responsibility and your culpability will be a lot higher than the person who can say, well, I was defending myself. I don't see anybody who needs to be killed to settle any political dispute. But at the same time, we have to be realistic. On the battlefield, the two sides are not always equal. One has the edge over the other because of access to institutional capacity and resources that the other side doesn't have. So will the ICC eventually prosecute people who are supporters of the current president, Alassane Ouattara? I don't know. Evidence is going to speak. If there's evidence, I'm sure they will eventually find it in them to prosecute. But for now, we're talking about a head of state who somehow insisted on staying in office after the popular vote and the international observers had said he lost.
Before we get to perhaps the root causes of that, Victor, I mean, many people are saying that the ICC also needs to implement a more broader view of the different parties, victims, communities, and other players, you know, in those crimes. But in terms of the Cote d'Ivoire, and with that in the case in point, I mean, how significant is this case for the ICC and for its purpose and objective on the continent?
It's significant because I think Laurent Gbagbo was the first head of state to be indicted, I think, at the ICC. There were people who would have been called rebel leaders or warlords that were indicted, but he was the first head of state to be indicted. Again, remember, I'm not Ivorian, so I'm not able to comment competently about the nuances of this case as to who should have won the election and who shouldn't. I know what was publicized as the popular vote. The significance of the ICC here is to make a statement to anyone, any leader who might be thinking of staying in power beyond what the popular vote, democratic vote, dictates they should do. I don't have a problem if your country decides we're going to change the constitution to allow you to run. That's a different story. But if you go against it, or if you go against an election result and you insist on staying in power, somebody must act against it. And I think the ICC has to insist on making sure that people who are thinking of even doing this are discouraged. Unfortunately, somebody will be used as an example.
And they will be held accountable. I mean, just quickly, what are some of the root causes that are causing African leaders perhaps to even fail to step down and not listen and adhere to the democratic process?
You say quickly, so I'll give you a cliche. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. When they say power corrupts, they mean it distorts your ability to think. It impairs your judgment. So what should be sensible to you as a head of state and somebody who has run a country for so many years, suddenly your ability to think gets impaired. That's what corruption means. It doesn't mean stealing money. It means your ability to think, your judgment get impaired by this power you have. And you are always going to be unable to give up the trappings of power. If you see how some of heads of states on the African continent travel, the luxury of being in office, the trappings of power, you will understand why they will not be able to give that up very easily.
Many Africans calling for Africans, as solutions to African problems. Suggesting alternative models to the ICC. What are your comments?
In fact, You can call Professor Shadrach Gutu, he'll tell you. He was there when the ICC, when the Rome Statute was formed.
Yes.
He was one of the African experts who said, yes, we agree with the ICC, but why don't you form an African chapter, a version of it? That suggestion was turned down. I'm not against it. Remember, we have the African Union. I would say if the African Union could have its own African court of arbitration and to charge people, I would say, yes, let's go there before we go to the international. The African Union doesn't have that. What do you expect the people who are victims of aggression to do?
Victor, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Of course, that was Victor Homo Eswana chatting to us about Africa, the ICC, and its role and relevancy on the African continent today. Now, Zimbabwe's main opposition leader and former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai is in a stable condition at the South African hospital after being airlifted from Harare in the early hours of Friday morning. Now, he fell ill during an MDC Alliance strategic meeting in Kadoma on Thursday. The report said he had returned to Harare, where his condition had worsened. According to reports, he was airlifted at around 2 a.m. on a chartered private jet to a medical facility in Johannesburg, South Africa. All this whilst he was accompanied by his wife Elizabeth, Dr. Ali Fazima, and anaesthetist nurse only called Fuzavazi. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.